I did have a massive brain stroke, and my entire right side was paralyzed, and I was in the ICU, and it was a tough time. A few things that, if I look back, I feel they really helped me. I think one is, what's your identity? We fight and we fight alone because these are all internal fears. I used to have nightmares. However, there is a beautiful ecosystem around us. We all need to dream because we don't know when that button will click and we will sleep after that. So try for everything that you want to, if you really want to make that happen. I still don't close the door of a hotel because I feel if something happens, how will somebody enter? Including when I was in South Africa and everybody said, you must close the door. And I said, I'm not going to close the door because for me, being safe is more important. There was an angel in my life, my coach, who then encouraged me to share, which is why I can share it today. Share it wide, helping people to know if somebody is going through a brain stroke, what should somebody do? It's okay. Everybody is going through something. Somebody is going through mental health. Somebody is going through physical health. Somebody is just going through some personal challenges in life. So, it's fine. We will come out of it, and sometimes we won't come out of it. But just the
Even that is
acknowledgement.
fine.
Even that is
Everything
fine.
that starts will end.
Will end.
Welcome to Office Tales and People podcast. Today, I have with me a very fascinating personality, a woman who started out right at the global role when she was right out of campus. I have spoken to her before this podcast, and when I was finding more about her, I learned that she's not just an inspiration for women and other leaders in the corporate world, but she's also built resilience, grit, and she's fought health wise. I would allow her to speak more about it, but I am going to bring a lot of conversation on global roles and how to look at behaviors amongst different kind of cultures that we are dealing with at workplaces and how to be better as leaders. Welcome, Sonal, on Office Tales and People podcast. I am so excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
So, Sonal, what I know that you've been in the global roles from ever since that you started your corporate journey. What I want to understand from you is that working with different countries and different people, we often meet different cultures, experience different kind of mindsets. What is it that you have experienced amongst different kind of people and behaviors that usually we don't get to read in books or get prepared with our seniors, or no textbook is actually sharing that with us? What have you experienced?
So that's a very interesting question, and thank you for taking me back in my memory. I joined from campus Wipro Technologies, and only by chance, I don't think I did anything very different, but only by chance I became the HR head just after coming out of from the campus, a couple of months of experience. And I was leading a business unit which was 1,800 people across the world, $300 million business revenue, and one of the fastest growing businesses in Wipro Technologies. Within a year's time, God was kind, and I also got a project within my own business because we were acquiring an IT division of a company in Americas. So my boss said, would you like to lead it? And there was no, would you like to? It was sort of, I had to lead it. And I was still learning to lead HR function. And of course, I said yes. And I went to the Connecticut area. It was a very, very difficult transition because we were acquiring 150 employees of the IT division of a client and then merging them back from an offshore onshore deal point of view. So very interesting. I was fairly young and I was in the room in middle of the conversation. My first experience, I was anyways learning the corporate HR. And I was in the room and I remember I used to get so much of backlash. Sometimes people would just stand up and say, this young girl, is she going to tell us what to do? I've had cases where, if you have an offer letter, people would just tear and throw it in the dustbin. And I was still learning. what to do. And I had my amazing role model in US. She was the HR head of US, called Supriti Bhandari. So I do want to remember her. And along with her, I think there are two things that I learned. One is you need to be aware of the local laws. Nobody will tell you enough, but you have to spend your own hard work to understand what does it mean. Secondly, everybody looks for respect and dignity. And I think their dignity was getting away. They were in the company for 30 years. Somebody from India comes and says, now your job is gone. So respect and dignity. Third, I learned that, we all are very intellectually savvy. So we all end up talking a lot about, what, this is my logic, this is my intelligence, this is the way it has to be done. We sometimes create a business case, but it just doesn't matter because for them, if they're losing their job, it really doesn't matter to them. So logic ends where fear begins. So one has to ensure that you are able to read through those barriers and then communicate. Next is really patience. And she said, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. You have to be resilient. If you feel bad because, somebody's talking to you like that, you don't need to react and respond. Just think about it and we will go as we are going through. And I was traveling different 5 cities, rolling out the offers. And so it was a difficult time in that moment. And this was also my first early in career US visits. I was also learning a different country culture. And as you know, in India, early in career, going to a country outside is fascinating. And then finally, we said, what does it mean? So we did build a couple of processes to ensure that we give comfort to people, that we are not making a hasty decision while the decision is made. And that really helped us to take the process forward. And I assume I left Wipro, after 2 years after that project, but I believe it was one of the very good transition deals across, and I learned a lot.
Yeah. So, what I hear from you in terms of human behavior is that respect, dignity, patience, resilience, all of this is really universal. And one should really work on these skills if they are looking for a global role.
Yeah.
So, Sonal, moving on from our first question, I want to also ask you about leaders. Across the globe, leadership styles are going to be various, right? With that comes a lot of unconscious biases, conscious biases. What do you have to say in terms of your experience of leaders and their biases?
Few things which I can think about. So I believe there are two things at the end of the spectrums. One is cultural harmony, and the other is cultural deception. And why does this happen? Because we grow up in different education systems. We learn about different histories, who captured whom, who invaded
And
which
history is
country,
distorted.
and history is distorted. Oh, thank you so much for saying it loud. In most of the places, right? And hence, our education system, our belief system, our stories that we hear, our religions across the world, our entertainment. We all see entertainment, media, social media from different parts of
Huge
the
influence on us.
huge influence. And hence, all of that starts building layers in our mind. And those layers, unfortunately, build deceptions. They build perceptions, and then we end up generalizing them. Right. So, a lot of generalization. If a company is headquartered in the West, it will behave like this. If a company is headquartered in Japan, they're going to behave like this. If it's a Chinese company, they will be sort of behaving in a different way.
Yeah.
So, those are the kind of perceptions and biases which get into our mind subconsciously and consciously, and we don't allow them to reflect and acknowledge. It's in our mind. So, they come as a mirror.
So, Sonal, it's just coming innately to me to ask you immediately, while you were dealing with so many different kind of leaders and coming from different cultures, how were you adjusting to their styles? Because, if tomorrow somebody is taking up a global role and has to deal with a Japanese or a Korean or a American or a European, how to juggle between so many kind of people? How did you do that, and what's your message to all the people who are going to take up global roles?
Yeah, I have a very simple trick. Just look into the eyes. When
Look
you
into the
meet,
eyes.
yeah, when
Okay.
you meet people, just remove all the filter for 30 seconds. and just look them into the eyes. And when you start talking to them, something connection which is very deep emerges out. So I'll give you an example. In 2016, I was in Europe with a large Europe team in one of my companies, and we were leading a large workshop. And it was very interesting on the dinner of the previous night. I mean, every country, teams were sitting in different parts of the tables. And, I had done some research saying, oh, if this country has this culture. And I started going to those tables and I could experience, what I had thought about. Again, my bias came in the middle. And next day morning, when we met with everybody over the sort of workshop, facilitation, interestingly started fading away. Interestingly, people were talking about, what do they feel and, what are the, transformation we were going through at that time. And by the end of the first day, when we went on the dinner on the second day, it was very interesting. I think my own biases went away because I didn't have a bias saying, a country in Europe will behave this, and B country will behave like this. But at the same time, there are differences. If I'm talking to my German colleagues, they're going to be very different from if I'm going to be talking to a colleague from Italy or a Spain. So they are going to be different. And I think for me, that was a validation of the fact that one, there are differences. We have no choice but to accept that there are differences. And secondly, there is huge, beautiful convergence. And hence, we need to acknowledge the differences, which I call as cultural sort of, spectrum. And at the same time, we have to converge to something very genuine and human because everybody thinks the same in terms of what value they want to create at work.
So, Sonal, I have also worked with many cultures, many countries, and what I have noticed is that often a specific corporate that's headquartered in, let's say, America or let's say Europe, and once they start expanding into the rest part of the world, they start promoting or maybe dominate it. They are literally dominating that particular culture to the rest of their regional workplaces that they're expanding to. How can organizations actually embrace inclusion rather than imposing one specific culture and not tell people that this is the prime culture rather than dominating on one culture? How can we actually include all the cultures to truly become inclusive?
Such a beautiful question. I really love the question, Shika, because I believe for global organization, this is one of the crux of whether the company would be successful or not. And so let me take a step back. And I always believe as a part one, if I can call it, it's very important for us to understand why do we exist? Why does the organization exist? What's the purpose of the organization? And then why do we exist in the organization? So, why does the organization exist? And why do we exist in the organization? And I think the ethos of why we exist, which means we are serving somebody. It could be a consumer, it could be a customer, it could be the culture, it could be the society, it could be the ecosystem. And once that is clear, that thread has to flow into the culture. So, I call it the culture thread. Now, what does it mean? For example, if you are a healthcare company, so one of the companies I worked for was a broad based healthcare company. And beautifully, the healthcare, which is really about building the heart's well being, was very much in the culture. Right? So, if you are a logistics company, if you're an FMCG company, you could be an NGO, you could be an entrepreneur, whatever you are. But I think the threadbare of why you exist in the organization and why does the organization exist, that culture has to almost work like a culture thread in the organization. So that's first, that's non negotiable to my mind. Second, interestingly, whatever we say, the West works very differently than East. So a Japanese headquartered company versus a US headquartered company versus a London headquartered companies versus an Indian headquartered company will work very differently.
Absolutely.
Because their roots are different, the leadership teams are based out of there, and hence they will always have something which is very core to the operation of that country, the culture of that country, and that sort of flows through. For me, the most important point that, like you asked, is the leadership teams. The ability of leadership teams to integrate the one and the two, which means why do we exist as an organization? Who are we serving? And then what's the culture the organization is bringing because it's headquartered in a particular place? I think that ability to build a congruence, that ability to build a convergence is extremely important. I believe it's an undefined role. Some people feel it's their responsibility to bring the two together. Some people feel it's not their responsibility to bring the two together. If they believe it's their responsibility, it works beautifully well because one, they're able to pass on everything that the culture in the people there would really understand, and they're also the voice of the organization. So if the organization wants speed and if a culture says no, let's hold, then the two are very, very different, right? So, how do you bring the amalgamation? So, culture amalgamation is the next word I will use, is something which is very, very critical for the leadership team.
Sonal, a lot of global leaders are hopping countries. In this hopping country role, one of the key issues I personally also have faced is that, you got to be kind. You got to be kind with people of different roles, labels, responsibilities. But at the same time, you got to be assertive, right? Having assertiveness, yet being kind without showing your kindness to be weakness. How does one navigate this?
Yeah, you really asked me a question about my one of my values, which is about being kind. And I took some time, I must say, to come to my perspective of what being kind is. And I will say what kindness is not first. So, according to me, kindness is not about loyalty. Kindness is not about favoritism. Kindness is not about being popular, right? And hence, according to me, what is about kindness? And kindness is about being fair, transparent, communicating with clarity, ensuring that ahead of time, if there is communication required, we communicate it to people. And sometimes it's really tough. And different cultures accept the communication very differently. And I must say, it was one of the tough assignments in one of my organizations, global role. We were restructuring, and the global capability functions was being restructured and then embedded back into the markets. um, Now, I believe the decision was right. I don't know if I felt the decision was right or wrong, but I do believe the decision was made. And hence, the choice and the chance that we had was communicating back with people, not about saying corporate decided, because again, corporate has cultural nuances, as you asked in previous question, but really saying this is the fact and reality. Reality is reality. I think the ability to talk about that with conviction and with honesty is important. We can still talk about how we feel and how I feel, but that's separate. But first of all, communicating it the way it is. Second is, like I said, proactively communicating. Third is understanding, what people desire and aspire. And one of the things we did was it had a very different, I would say, profile of leaders at that time across the world. So we did ask individuals what are their aspirations. And, some people said, my time is done and I want to now make another way. I want to leave. But then, how do we ensure we really take their message out there? Sometimes you have to fight for your people, but you should be ready to do it. You should be then ready to come back and say, listen, I fought for you, but this happened or not happened. So, in the global restructuring experience, I think some principles that I personally followed. One is everybody was going through a huge amount of chaos in their mind, and hence ensuring that I'm fair, I'm transparent, I'm able to communicate ahead of the time, I'm able to look into their eyes and say, this is the reality, and then represent them what best I can represent, and then go back and close the loop. And there's always a personal connection. So don't let that go because you have built a long relationship with the individuals. They look up to you, they want you to represent them. And I think some of those areas really helped to be kind, assertive, firm, but not rude.
So, Sonal, as you're aware, the world democracies are under threat. Yet, we see the entire world having access to internet has given them voice. Everybody has a voice. and specifically Gen Z have been very vocal, right? Which means people's expectation in the workplaces is also becoming very vocal. And there is a very serious shift on empathy, on inclusion. The ask from employees have been different today versus yesterday. How leaders are globally, how are they keeping up to that expectation?
The expectations of people are going to be different because the geopolitical sense which is happening, the geographies and boundaries, everything is converging and merging. Like you said, the social media, the news, and sometimes we don't even know whether the news is right or wrong, right? Broadly. So the expectations of people are changing. That's one. Second is, I think people are becoming more aware of right and wrong. A lot of times, right and wrong is defined by the law. Even there, sometimes there are grays. But even otherwise, people are becoming more aware about their rights. And I feel Black Lives Matter, the whole episode that happens, really changed the world to talk about what's right about them and wrong at a sort of global level. And then COVID really helped people understand themselves more. And I always feel, after COVID, the whole well being conversation took a huge amount of beautiful turn because people started understanding if you lose your life and your family, it's going to be very different, right? However, some expectations are always going to remain same, and I continue to talk about respect, dignity, communication, clarity. Some expectations are very different. So, how do they lead their lives? I believe, while the upbringing is different for different people in different cultures in the world, and hence how do they respond is very different. How do they think is very different. And that is a crux, I would say, in the middle of everything that one needs to understand. So if I'm speaking to somebody in Poland, then how would they respond because their upbringing and their culture is different? Versus if I'm talking to somebody in Brazil, how will they respond because they think slightly differently is very important. So I'll give you an example. It's very interesting. In one of my companies, the line manager was based out of US, and she was engaging with a team member in India. Now in US, she believed they all had work-life balance, and then after a certain number of hours, they will switch off. But she always believed that a team member in India will be available whenever required. Even if the time zone is different, she will be available midnight and early mornings and so on. And, she started sort of telling the team member, send me an email at this time and that time. And this team member in India very nicely, respectfully went back to the manager and said, listen, I have kids, I have elder care. And hence, I will work so many hours. I will ensure that I do my work, but I'm not available by X and Y time. And for me, that was such an act of kindness at both ends because the manager in US said, I never realized, it just came out of my bias that everybody in India works 24 bar 7, and maybe she would have said someday, I'm always available. It's just a way of expressing yourself. So expectations are different. However, we need to understand what do people expect, and very important for leadership team members to understand what do people expect. I have always believed, and I've always asked that first question: what do you expect from your work? What do you expect from your environment? And is there something that we are missing out today that we need to build? It gives a huge amount of, I would say, open of the door, openness in individuals to talk about what do they expect. And those are the little biases that we need to take away. And I'll just give one more short example.
Absolutely.
We have teams in Mexico, and the government is changing the number of working hours from, if I remember right, I think from 48 to downwards. And the employees are going to be same who have been working in our organization for the last 20 years. However, when the law happens, the expectations would change. Expectations would change on how do we work, what is the task, how do we pay our employees, how is it considered by law. So I think law makes it creates an expectation in the country. the cultural and societal norms create those expectation, and personally, individually, employees do have expectation which could be very different from maybe sometime even the cultural laws and societal values.
So what you're saying is that leaders need to really know their employees' expectation and act upon those expectations appropriately, right?
Yeah, and get away from biases,
And get away
because,
from biases.
everybody in China works like that. Doesn't work every time, because there could be one person in China who
Who would,
doesn't want to work
yeah,
like
who
that,
works differently.
who works
So,
differently.
so finding more about a specific person's need is the way forward, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I know, Sonal, this is going to be a little bit tough because I'm asking you that leaders naturally, as a tag, gives them permission to be dominant, um, but sticking to their roots, being authentic and adaptable, is not something that can be learned in a leadership program. While, of course, it's part of a module, how do you think leaders should shed away their dominance and actually start adopting the two key skills, which is authenticity and adaptability in current scenario?
That's a tough one.
I told you it's a bit
I
tough.
I must say. So I have always believed being a leader is divine and precious. It's a responsibility, because you owe it to so many people who believe in the small group of people sitting in a conference room or a boardroom. You will represent the interest of the organization and of theirs. So leadership is divine and precious. Leadership is also dominating, right? Because it gives you that power, it gives you information ahead of time. And hence, how do you balance the both? And me, in my view, there are two things that helps leader. And I've built it and I'm still building it. One is wisdom and one is judgment. Right. And what do I mean by it? So when I look at authenticity, a lot of people try and just share anything on their mind and they want to be authentic. There was a time one of the leaders started almost talking against what company was doing. And he said in forums that I am being authentic. And I don't think that's being authentic, because, an organization creates the purpose of what we want to do. And sometimes gets on a path, sometimes which is not very clear. And hence, as leaders, it's important to work through that path because we choose to be part of that company, versus going in a forum and saying, I don't believe in it and that's wrong what company is doing. Because the role of a leader through wisdom and judgment is to say it where it matters, change it where the person has the empowerment to do it, right? So I think for me, that balance is very important. I'll talk about an instant where one of our directors in my previous company was in Latin America. So he was head of Latin America. And he used to always feel and believe that, oh my God, there's just different things coming out of the corporate headquarters. And for this function, our headquarter was supposed to be in Singapore. So you can imagine the kind of zone difference on time that we were working with. So he'd never agreed with everything that we were sort of trying to roll out and converge. However, he had a really beautiful way of being very challenging in the room. He never feared anybody. He would say what he believes is right or wrong. In that process, he actually created his own mind space of what's right, what's wrong, whether it's done or doable, not doable. And then when he went back, he was very clear. He was clear how to communicate. I think his scorecard metric, his leadership was one of the best. And he had a very nice way of, again, the building of the judgment and wisdom. So he would say whatever he wanted and whatever he felt in those meeting rooms where it mattered, changed, either get people influenced or get himself influenced. But when he went out, I think he authentically then was able to communicate, what the organization was wanting to do. And even if he felt something is not in line, he would make it happen. He would work with his team and say, if XYZ theme is coming out, we will make it happen. Right? So he had a very beautiful way of working through his people, the corporate team, and his own self. And I think he had a lot of self awareness in really making leadership divine and precious, as I say.
So, Sonal, at the end of this podcast, I want to ask you something personal. I know we haven't planned anything like that, but I'm very, very curious. You have gone through such a tough time when it comes to a brain stroke and managing all of that and a global role where you've traveled massively. And I know you were sharing this personal choice of yours of not locking doors in the hotel. I I just want to understand, being a woman, this particular section is going to inspire so many women who are now going to be taking leadership roles, that what is it that we all need to do, not just women but anybody who ever goes through any health concern, how to still keep going on in spite of having fears and vulnerabilities, and yet being in such a leadership sort of role. uh, I want you to give tips to all of us.
This is very personal.
Yes.
And I haven't spoken about it a lot. I think recently over the years I have. So, I did have a massive brain stroke and my entire right side was paralyzed. And, it was a tough time. I was in the ICU and, I went, I was just in the hospital for very long. And then I took some time because I was on very heavy medication. I also had fits after that, and hence, a lot of recovery needed to be done. A few things that, if I look back, I don't think I planned it that ways, but if I look back, I feel they really helped me. I think one is, what's your identity? Till that time, my identity was my organization. I used to feel, oh, if I work in this company, that's my identity. And suddenly that identity goes away because your circle of reference is very different. Your circle of reference is no more your colleagues and peers and boss and team members. No, your circle of reference is the patient in the other room in the hospital. So I always have reflected after that on what's your identity. We should not get stuck with just a work or one or two things. I think it's about who we are. So that's one. Second is, we fight and we fight alone because these are all internal fears. I used to have nightmares. However, there is a beautiful ecosystem around us. And for me, it was my family, friends, my team members. So they were amazing. And I think just the prayers of people all across who came and met me and gave me a lot of blessings was amazing. So sometimes we don't understand what's the ecosystem around us. The third is, I realize that we all need to dream because we don't know when that button will click and we will sleep after that. So whatever is your dream, you must put in your best effort. You should not be able to say and regret that I did not try. So try for everything that you want to if you really want to make that happen. The next one is that, take it on, and I must call out my dad and my mom and my husband. I was not allowed to travel in a car even for 4 hours because they say you have thrombosis, if you sit for long. And I got into a global role just coming out as I was recovering, again by luck. And, I did 21 international travel back to back, most of them alone. So I used to carry my emergency kits. I used to carry a note saying, if I fall into a brain stroke again, please just put me into an emergency of a hospital and give me these. There were some emergency nasal drops, so that I can stay on for a couple of while. And that was just so important because, I just had no choice but to just be out there. And, I would go out, and I remember I was in Istanbul. We were on the Bosphorus Rivers cruise. And, I was feeling just not okay because, I used to feel, my God, just like now I will again collapse. But I had the ecosystem. I had a couple of one or two friends in the team who really sort of picked me and sort of said, it's okay, it doesn't matter. If something happens, we'll take you to the hospital. So it started becoming a part of life. Like you rightly said, I still don't close the door of a hotel because I feel if something happens, how will somebody enter? Including when I was in South Africa. And everybody said, my God, you are in Johannesburg and you are in Durban, you must close the door. And I said, I'm not going to close the door because for me, being safe is more important in my health. And I still sleep on the side of the emergency button of the phone. These are the things that you just get accustomed to. And final one that I will say is, for many years I didn't share it because I just felt very guilty about it. I used to feel I have done something wrong in my life, why this happened to me. And especially I feel sometimes women go through it more. They just feel more guilty about everything. And I don't
Even
know
a bad
why.
health?
Yeah, even a bad health. And there was an angel in my life, my coach, who then encouraged me to share, which is why I can share it today. Share it wide for two reasons. One is helping people to know, if somebody is going through a brain stroke, what should somebody do? Because they say, I think there's golden 8 minutes that you need to get the help. And secondly, it's okay. Everybody is going through something. Somebody's going through mental health, somebody's going through physical health, somebody's just going through some personal challenges in life. So, it's fine. We will come out of it. And sometimes we won't come out of it. But just the
Even that is
acknowledgement,
fine.
even that is
Everything
fine,
that starts will end.
will end. So, yeah.
At this time, we also started the podcast and we are ending. But at this moment, I want to really, truly thank you for being so vulnerable with me in public forum and sharing so many things on camera and off camera. Thank you so much, Sonal, for coming on this podcast, on Office Tales and People podcast. But more than that, also, I'm so thankful for being so honest with me, in spite that we know each other very briefly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shika, for giving me this space, and I really value it.
Thank you. Thank you for watching Office Tales and People podcast with me and Sonal. I hope this episode inspires you if you are going to be in a global role or you're already in a global role, and if you are facing any personal health challenge. Do not forget some of the tips that Sonal gave in the end of the podcast. And don't forget to share this OTP with your colleagues. Happy watching Office Tales and People podcast. Until next time, bye.